The initial concept struck Eliza May Dawson while she was standing in the partially frozen mud beneath their elevated cabin, attempting to retrieve a rolling tin of lard that had slipped through a gap in the floorboards. It was February of 1847, and the harsh winter of the Montana Territory had already claimed two of their neighbors, one to pneumonia and the other to sheer starvation after his root cellar froze completely solid. Eliza had been a widow for 8 months, left with a 5-year-old daughter, an elevated cabin her late husband had constructed too high off the ground, and a resilience that frontier existence both demanded and fostered. She ducked into the crawl space, a lantern in hand, muttering under her breath about the 18-inch gap between the earth and the floor, a detail James had insisted upon. Proper drainage, he'd stated, keeps the decay at bay. However, this design also created a frigid, unusable void that channeled every winter gust sweeping across the Montana plains. Yet, standing there, lantern illuminating the mud-caked lard tin, she experienced something unanticipated: warmth. It wasn't substantial, but compared to the biting external cold, 15 degrees Fahrenheit, with a wind that felt like a razor, the area beneath the cabin was perceptibly warmer. She remained motionless, trying to comprehend the sensation. Heat from the cook stove above was radiating down through the floorboards. The ground below, insulated by the snow piled around the foundation, was releasing its stored warmth from autumn. Even the log walls that extended to ground level served to retain the heat. Eliza May stood perfectly still, her breath misting in the lantern light, an idea dawning that was either brilliant or utterly reckless. What if this wasn't wasted space? What if it could be transformed into a greenhouse? The thought was so audacious it provoked a laugh. A short, sharp sound in the confined space. A greenhouse in winter in Montana, conceived by a widow with barely enough funds for spring seeds. Nevertheless, the more she considered it, the more the underlying principles made sense. Heat rises, yes, but it also disperses. Their cook stove burned robustly throughout the winter, a necessity for both cooking and warmth. This heat warmed the cabin's floor, and some of it was escaping downwards, going to waste. If she could capture and contain it, perhaps even amplify it with glass to harness sunlight, she might have something. She remained there for another 10 minutes, the cold forgotten as her mind raced with possibilities. She spent 2 weeks contemplating the idea thoroughly before confiding in anyone, even Grace. Eliza had learned through experience that prematurely announcing nascent plans often invited either pity or ridicule, neither of which she could afford. Instead, she observed, measured, and meticulously planned. The cabin rested upon 12 substantial stone piers, each sunk 3 feet into the earth and rising 18 inches above ground level. James had adopted this construction method after witnessing too many frontier cabins succumb to rot from ground contact. The floor joists were roughly hewn pine, 14 inches deep, spanning 8 feet between the piers. Above these, inch-thick pine planks formed the actual floor, interspersed with gaps for drainage. Eliza realized these very gaps were ideal for heat transference. The under-cabin space measured approximately 20 feet by 16 feet, enclosed on 3 sides by the cabin's log walls, extending to ground level. The front faced south and was open, allowing airflow in summer, but creating a wind tunnel of misery in winter. However, if she were to seal this southern opening with glass, glass presented the primary challenge. It was costly, fragile, and exceptionally difficult to transport across the frontier without damage. The nearest sizable settlement was a 3-day wagon journey away, and the closest reliable source of window glass was likely St. Louis, a month's travel even in favorable conditions. Eliza needed an alternative solution. She discovered it within the pages of the Sears and Roebuck catalog, a volume Mrs. Peterson had lent her, its pages dog-eared and stained from frequent frontier use. There, nestled between advertisements for cast-iron stoves and patent medicines, she found precisely what she required: greenhouse cold frames. The description was straightforward. Wooden frames 3 feet by 6 feet with glazed sash tops, hinged for ventilation, protecting tender plants from frost. Essential for the progressive farmer, $4.50 each. These were designed to be placed directly on the ground, creating miniature greenhouses for seed starting. But Eliza envisioned their use differently. If she ordered 6 of these frames and installed them vertically as windows along the south-facing opening of her crawl space, she would effectively create a glass wall. The hinge tops would facilitate ventilation, and the wooden frames would be simpler to install than individual panes of glass. The total cost would be $27, nearly all the remaining funds she possessed after selling James's tools. That evening, Grace found her mother engrossed in arithmetic by candlelight, the catalog spread open, figures scrawled on a slate. "Mama, what are you calculating?" Eliza looked at her daughter, small for her 5 years, exhibiting a maturity beyond her age, wearing a dress that had been let out twice and was still too short. Grace deserved more than daily rations of salt pork and cornmeal. She deserved vegetables, fresh greens, something vibrant in the depths of winter. "I'm figuring out how to grow food in February," Eliza replied. Grace's eyes widened. "Magic engineering," Eliza corrected, then softened her tone. "Come here, let me show you something." She took Grace's hand and led her to a corner where the floorboards had the widest gaps. Lighting a candle, she held it close to the opening. "Watch the flame." The candle flame flickered and bent downwards, drawn by the draft of warm air descending through the floor. "Heat rises," Eliza explained, "but it also spreads. The warmth from our stove heats the floor. Some of that warmth sinks down into the space below. Right now, it just escapes into the cold. But if we trapped it, if we made that space into a room with glass walls, we could keep it warm enough to grow things, vegetables, herbs, maybe even flowers." Grace was silent for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought. "Then, will it work?" Eliza May Dawson, who had been posing the same question to herself for 2 weeks, looked at her daughter and spoke the only certainty she possessed. "I'm going to find out." The order took 6 weeks to arrive, making its way up the Missouri River by steamboat and then overland by freight wagon. When the wagon driver began unloading 6 wooden crates marked fragile glass, a significant portion of the trading post inhabitants gathered to observe. "Building a greenhouse, Mrs. Dawson?" inquired Tom Morrison, the post manager, his tone not unkind. "Something akin to that," Eliza responded, carefully inspecting the crates for any signs of damage. "That's a substantial amount of money for a maybe," remarked Frank Hutchkins, who had lost his own wife to childbirth the previous spring and held strong opinions on how widows should allocate their resources. Eliza offered no reply. She had learned that attempting to justify oneself to skeptics was a futile expenditure of energy. She paid the freight charges, enlisted Morrison's eldest son to assist in loading the crates onto her wagon, and then drove home. Grace was waiting on the porch, practically quivering with anticipation. "Are they here? Did they break?" "They're here," Eliza confirmed, "and we'll know shortly if they sustained any damage." Together, they opened the first crate, carefully prying at the nails to preserve the wooden components within. Nestled in straw was a remarkable object, a wooden frame measuring 3 feet by 6 feet, crafted from pine and painted white. The upper third consisted of a glazed sash comprising 12 panes of glass, each one intact, set within a hinged frame that operated smoothly on brass hinges. Grace tentatively reached out a single fingertip to touch the glass. "It's so smooth." "Indeed," Eliza agreed, "and expensive. We'll need to be exceedingly careful with it." They dedicated the remainder of the day to unpacking all 6 frames. By some remarkable feat of freight handling, or perhaps divine providence, only 1 pane was cracked, and even that fracture was a clean break that could be mended with putty and still remain functional. That night, after Grace had fallen asleep, Eliza sat at the table and began sketching out her plans. She wasn't an engineer by profession, but James had instilled in her the importance of thorough project planning before commencing work. "Measure twice, cut once," he'd often said. "Plan for potential failures and build for enduring strength." The south-facing opening beneath the cabin measured approximately 16 feet in width and 18 inches in height, from ground level to the bottom edge of the floor joists. Her 6 cold frames, when stood upright, would be too tall. Each frame was 6 feet long, and the opening was merely 18 inches high. She would need to modify them, reducing their dimensions, and install them horizontally in 2 tiers, 3 frames on the lower row and 3 on the upper, thereby creating a glass wall 6 feet in height and 18 feet in width. The mathematical calculations aligned. The critical question was whether she possessed the necessary carpentry skills. She began the following morning, after Grace had finished breakfast. The task demanded a level of precision she wasn't entirely sure she possessed, but necessity proved to be an excellent instructor. First, she needed to prepare the opening itself. The space between the ground and the floor joists was currently an open void. She needed to construct a proper frame, establishing a sturdy wall structure to which the glass frames could be affixed. Eliza cut 2x4 pine lumber to the required lengths using James's crosscut saw, a tool she had taught herself to sharpen during the long winter. She erected vertical studs every 3 feet along the south-facing opening, carefully measuring their placement with a knotted string she had marked at 12-inch intervals. Each stud had to be precisely plumb, otherwise the entire structure would twist. She sank the base of each stud 6 inches into the earth, compacting the soil firmly with a wooden mallet. The top she secured to the underside of the floor joists using hand-forged nails, an expensive but essential purchase. Each nail represented a calculation. Would it hold? Could she afford it? What would be the consequences of an incorrect estimation? Subsequently, she added horizontal crossmembers at 2 distinct heights, one 6 inches from the ground and another 12 inches up, thereby creating a grid framework designed to distribute the weight of the glass and withstand wind pressure. James had imparted this principle to her. Any structure requires both vertical and horizontal support. Vertical elements bear weight, horizontal elements resist lateral forces. Grace assisted, passing her nails one at a time from an old tobacco tin and steadying boards when Eliza required both hands for the saw. She was learning without explicit instruction. "Why are we making boxes, Mama?" "Because glass needs something robust to rest against," Eliza explained, pausing to wipe sawdust from her forehead. "If we simply hung it in the air, the wind would shatter it. But if we provide it with a strong frame, it can endure. The frame absorbs the stress. The glass simply needs to function as glass. Like how my doll needs me to hold her." Eliza smiled. "Exactly like that." The work required 3 days of continuous effort. Her hands blistered, then developed calluses. Her shoulders ached from the unfamiliar angles of working overhead. However, by the conclusion of the task, Eliza had constructed a proper wall frame featuring 6 rectangular openings, each precisely sized to accommodate her cold frame windows. The structure was solid, square, verified with a string level, and ready. She had also gained a profound understanding of her own capabilities. She could measure, cut, and build. This newfound knowledge felt like a tangible form of power. Now came the delicate phase, installing the glass. She had adjusted her approach after the first day's work. Instead of shortening the cold frames, which might compromise their structural integrity, she would install them at an angle, tilted to maximize sunlight absorption. The lower frames would be positioned nearly horizontally, angled upwards at 30 degrees. The upper frames would be more vertical, creating a sloping glass wall that followed the trajectory of the winter sun. It was an unconventional design, but it made logical sense. She was constructing something the catalog had never envisioned. The first frame was mounted on a Saturday. Eliza lifted it carefully, with Grace guiding from below, and secured it to the frame using screws rather than nails. Screws offered the advantage of adjustability should she have miscalculated the dimensions. The frame fit perfectly. The glass caught the morning light and reflected it back in brilliant sheets. Grace clapped her hands. "It's beautiful, Mama." It was. Eliza immediately perceived a difference. With even a single frame in place, the wind was effectively blocked. The enclosed space felt noticeably calmer. By the end of the week, all 6 frames were securely mounted. The south-facing opening had been transformed into a wall of glass, angled and radiant. The hinged sash tops could still be opened for ventilation, but for the time being, Eliza kept them closed. She had successfully created a greenhouse beneath her house in Montana during winter. Now the crucial question remained: would it actually function as intended? The initial test occurred that night. Eliza prepared dinner as usual: salt pork, beans, and cornbread, ensuring the cook stove remained hot. After Grace was asleep, she descended into the underhouse space with a lantern and a thermometer. The thermometer registered 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside, the temperature was 19 degrees and continuing to drop. Inside the cabin, near the stove, it was 65 degrees, and here, in this intermediate space, shielded by glass and warmed by the floor above, it was 48 degrees. Above freezing, though barely, it was still an improvement. Eliza May Dawson allowed herself a moment of profound satisfaction. The underlying principle was sound. Heat from the stove was indeed seeping through the floorboards. The glass was effectively trapping it. The earth below was contributing its stored warmth. It wasn't yet warm enough for most vegetables, but it was a significant beginning. Over the ensuing week, she implemented further improvements. She banked earth against the exterior of the glass frames, creating an insulating berm that minimized heat loss through the base. She sealed any gaps between the frames with oakum, the same tarred hemp fibers used for caulking ships, which was available at the trading post. She incorporated thermal mass. This was a technique she had encountered in an agricultural journal. Dark-colored materials absorb heat during the day and gradually release it at night. She collected river stones, painted them black using lamp black mixed with linseed oil, and arranged them in barrels beneath the glass. During daylight hours, sunlight would warm them, and at night they would radiate heat back into the space. The temperature steadily climbed: 50 degrees, 52, 55. Finally, when the thermometer remained consistently at 58 degrees for 3 consecutive nights, Eliza deemed it the opportune moment. "Grace," she announced one morning, "today we are going to plant a garden." The soil itself presented a considerable challenge. She couldn't excavate frozen ground, and the earth beneath the house, while unfrozen, was a compacted, lifeless hardpan, compressed by years of foot traffic and the constant drip of water from the floorboards above. She needed to construct garden beds from scratch. She built raised beds using scrap lumber that James had stockpiled. These were simple boxes, 2 feet wide and 6 feet long, arranged in rows on either side of the central walkway she had meticulously planned. Each box required careful construction. The sides needed to be robust enough to contain the weight of the soil, yet she couldn't afford to waste lumber. She cut the boards, drilled pilot holes to prevent splitting, and assembled them using the last of James's square-cut nails. She had anticipated this need, ordering not only glass frames but also seeds, and something entirely new to her experience, discovered while reading that same agricultural journal Mrs. Peterson had loaned her: composted manure, dried and aged, suitable for hotbeds and forcing houses. It arrived in burlap sacks that emitted precisely the expected odor. Grace wrinkled her nose dramatically. "That's awful, Mama." "That's fertility," Eliza corrected, though privately she concurred. "Plants adore it. It's packed with everything they require to thrive: nitrogen, phosphorus, organic matter, and it generates heat as it decomposes, which we desperately need." She filled the raised beds with carefully constructed layers, a technique detailed in the journal. The bottom layer consisted of 6 inches of the dried manure, which would slowly decompose and warm the soil from beneath. Next came prairie soil she had collected in the autumn and stored in barrels. It was rich, dark loam from a creek bottom where native grasses had flourished for centuries. She mixed this with more composted manure, creating a nutrient-rich growing medium. The final top layer was 2 inches of fine soil blended with sand to ensure proper drainage and facilitate seed germination. Each bed took approximately an hour to fill. Grace helped scoop soil, gently tamping it down with her small hands, constantly posing questions. Why does the manure create heat? Because microscopic organisms invisible to the naked eye consume it, and as they consume it, they generate warmth, much like you feel warm after eating your supper. There are creatures in the dirt? Millions of them, Eliza confirmed. They are helpers. The bed emitted a faint steam in the cool air when Eliza first watered them with warm water from the stove. The decomposing manure was generating its own heat, precisely as the journal had promised. She watched with a sense of deep satisfaction as the steam rose, biology and physics working in concert, a testament to the interconnectedness of everything. Then came the planting. Eliza had selected her seeds with meticulous care, opting for varieties specifically bred for cold frames and winter forcing. These included Tom Thumb lettuce, Laxton's marvel cabbage, early round spinach, and herbs such as parsley, chives, and wintertime. She also ordered carrot and radish seeds, fast-growing varieties capable of tolerating cool soil. Grace assisted. Her small fingers displayed surprising dexterity in spacing the seeds correctly. "Not too deep," Eliza instructed. "Lettuce seeds need light to sprout. Simply press them into the soil and cover them lightly." They worked together throughout the afternoon, planting row after row. By evening, 6 raised beds were planted, watered, and awaiting germination. "Now what?" Grace inquired. "Now we wait," Eliza replied. "And we hope." The seeds germinated in 8 days. Eliza had been checking them twice daily, descending into the greenhouse each morning and evening with her lantern, anxiously monitoring the temperature, moisture levels, and guarding against damping off, fungal diseases, and seed-eating insects, every potential failure her research had warned her about. She had meticulously maintained a journal of temperatures, noting that the greenhouse consistently held between 55 and 62 degrees Fahrenheit, fluctuating based on external conditions and the intensity of the cookstove's heat. But on the 8th morning, February 28th, according to her careful calendar tracking, she descended with the lantern and discovered tiny green shoots emerging in the lettuce bed, dozens of them perfectly spaced in the rows she and Grace had meticulously planted. She summoned Grace immediately, unable to contain her burgeoning excitement. "Look very carefully, right there." Grace peered at the soil, initially confused, seeing only dark earth. Then Eliza adjusted the lantern's angle, and suddenly they became visible. Minuscule sprouts, pale green and impossibly delicate, pushing their way through the dark earth like miniature miracles. Is that lettuce?" "That is lettuce," Eliza confirmed, hearing the tremor of emotion in her own voice, a blend of relief, triumph, and the sheer joy of a gamble that had paid off. "We are growing food in February in Montana, right under the house." Grace tentatively extended a small finger, stopping just short of touching. "May I touch it?" "Very gently. The stem is quite delicate." Grace brushed the tiny plant with the tip of one finger, her expression one of solemn reverence. "It's soft." "It is," Eliza agreed, "and in a few weeks, if we care for it properly, it will be large enough for us to eat." More seeds sprouted over the following days. The spinach emerged in neat, uniform rows. Eliza had been more precise with spacing after her experience with the lettuce. The radishes emerged rapidly, their cotyledons unfurling like tiny hands reaching towards the filtered sunlight. The carrots were slower to appear, taking 12 days, but eventually revealed themselves as delicate, feathery shoots. The cabbage seeds germinated within 10 days, producing robust seedlings that Eliza knew would require thinning later. She thinned the lettuce on day 14, carefully pulling every other seedling to allow the remaining plants ample space to grow. It felt like a waste until Grace astutely pointed out that they could consume the thinnings. And so they did. Tiny lettuce plants, roots and all, washed and added to their dinner. They were small, but they were fresh, green, and alive, and they tasted unequivocally of hope. Word of her endeavor spread. News on the frontier traveled through a combination of informal gossip, visits to the trading post, and the arrival of freight wagons. By March, the local populace was aware that the Dawson widow had constructed some sort of contraption beneath her residence and was purportedly cultivating vegetables during the winter months. Some dismissed it as mere rumor. Others speculated that she had somehow preserved her autumn harvest and was fabricating the claim of fresh produce. Frank Hutchkins openly declared that she was squandering precious resources on a foolish endeavor. Then Mrs. Peterson paid a visit. She was the wife of the trading post manager, a pragmatic woman in her 50s who had navigated 20 years on the frontier by maintaining an open mind to new ideas. She brought Grace a hand-sewn rag doll as a gift, complete with embroidered eyes and yarn hair, and politely inquired if she might be permitted to see this rumored greenhouse. Eliza obliged. Mrs. Peterson descended the stairs into the underhouse space, a lantern in hand, and stopped abruptly, her gaze fixed on the remarkable sight before her. The transformation was remarkable. What had been a dark, cramped crawl space was now a vibrant and productive garden sanctuary. Glass panels shimmered, admitting soft, diffused sunlight. The elevated planting boxes overflowed with lush greenery. Lettuce leaves displayed deep emerald hues. Spinach plants stood robust and healthy. Radish tops sported a bright, cheerful green, and carrot fronds unfurled in delicate, feathery patterns. Young cabbage plants showed sturdy promise, and aromatic herbs filled the warm, humid atmosphere with their fragrance. 2 lanterns, lit at the foot of the stairs, cast a warm, golden glow that mingled with the daylight filtering through the glass. The temperature was pleasantly mild, registering around 60 degrees Fahrenheit. The air carried the rich scent of soil, burgeoning life, and fresh well water, a scent that spoke of vitality. Mrs. Peterson proceeded with a leisurely pace along the central walkway, her gaze taking in every detail. She gently stroked a lettuce leaf, assessing its texture. She leaned in to inhale the perfume of the herbs. She meticulously examined the installation of the glass frames. She ran her fingers over the painted rocks. Understanding their intended function, she felt the surface of a raised bed, discerning the gentle warmth emanating from the composting manure beneath. Finally, she turned to Eliza, her expression reflecting a profound sense of wonder. "You've constructed a greenhouse beneath your dwelling, utilizing cold frames and supplies procured through mail order," she stated, her voice filled with admiration. Eliza responded, "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Peterson inquired further, "How consistently warm does it remain?" Eliza explained, "Between 55 and 62 degrees, depending on the external temperature and the extent to which I utilize the cook stove. It is warmer on sunlit days. I meticulously maintain records." She then presented Mrs. Peterson with her journal, detailing daily temperature readings. "And it is the heat radiating from your floor that sustains its warmth," Mrs. Peterson observed. Eliza elaborated, "The floor heating contributes to it, certainly. The solar energy through the glass, the earth beneath, the thermal mass." She gestured towards the painted rocks. "These help to stabilize the temperature. The composting manure also generates heat. It all functions in concert." Mrs. Peterson slowly shook her head. "My husband absolutely must witness this. A significant portion of the trading post community needs to see this. This could fundamentally alter how individuals endure the winter months here. Fresh produce available in February, a method to extend the growing season by several months," Eliza offered humbly. "It is merely vegetables, Mrs. Peterson." Mrs. Peterson countered, "It is ingenuity. It is a matter of survival. It serves as definitive proof that the frontier need not equate to months of deprivation and the threat of scurvy." She paused. "May I bring others to view this remarkable achievement? You may possess something truly significant here." Eliza considered for a moment, then nodded. "Good ideas are meant to be disseminated. Yes, by all means, bring them." By the month of April, the lettuce was ready for harvesting. Eliza carefully plucked the outer leaves, allowing the central portions to continue their growth, employing a cut-and-come-again technique that ensured a continuous supply. The spinach was plentiful, and the radishes offered a crisp, peppery bite. She prepared the first salad in 4 months. Grace gazed at the bowl of fresh greens as if it were a miraculous creation. "May I eat it?" she asked tentatively. "That is precisely the intention," Eliza replied with a smile. They shared the meal together, seated at their simple hand-hewn table. Fresh lettuce and radishes were seasoned with a touch of vinegar and salt. The meal was modest, yet deeply meaningful. Grace chewed thoughtfully, then looked up. This tastes like summertime." Eliza felt a familiar prickle of tears behind her eyes. Her daughter had appeared so pale throughout the winter, subsisting on preserved foods and salted meat. Already, after merely a week of consuming fresh vegetables, a healthy color had returned to her cheeks. Eliza responded, "It does, doesn't it?" Mrs. Peterson brought her husband to see the greenhouse the following week. Subsequently, they brought the Morrison family. Then Frank Hutchkins arrived, initially skeptical and prone to argument, but he departed in a state of quiet contemplation. By May, when the outdoor ground had finally thawed sufficiently for planting a conventional garden, Eliza May Dawson had received 11 requests for assistance in constructing similar enclosed gardens. She also received an offer from the regional representative of Sears and Roebuck to feature her design in their catalog, accompanied by a modest payment for the publishing rights. She accepted both propositions. The catalog listing appeared in the autumn of 1848 under the heading Innovative Agricultural Solutions for the Progressive Homesteader. It included precise measurements, a comprehensive list of required materials, and Eliza's meticulous notes on temperature regulation and ventilation. The payment, $15, represented more money than she had handled in a single transaction since James's passing. More importantly, the design reached individuals she would never encounter in territories she would never visit, aiding families she would never know in surviving winters that might otherwise have overwhelmed them. The narrative might have concluded at this juncture. A frontier innovation, the clever solution devised by a resourceful woman to combat winter scarcity, a modest triumph that helped a few families persevere. However, what Eliza May had conceived proved to be more consequential than she had initially comprehended. The underhouse greenhouse addressed multiple challenges inherent to frontier life simultaneously. It maximized the utilization of otherwise wasted space. It required no supplemental heating beyond that of the standard household stove. It provided fresh sustenance during the most perilous months of the year, and it could be constructed using materials readily available through mail order. By the subsequent year, Eliza had assisted 7 families in erecting their own versions. Each adaptation was subtly unique, tailored to their specific cabin configurations and individual requirements. Some incorporated additional glass panels. Others integrated cisterns for the storage of warmed water. One family chose to construct theirs entirely below ground level, creating a genuine pit greenhouse with only the glass visible above the terrain. Eliza found herself emerging as an unexpected authority on the subject. She provided her advice without charge but accepted compensation for hands-on construction assistance, ensuring a fair day's wage for a fair day's labor. This was sufficient to augment her income and provide a measure of financial security. Grace, meanwhile, discovered she possessed a natural aptitude for working with plants. She assumed a significant portion of the greenhouse management responsibilities, developing an ability to discern subtle indications of stress or disease, to effectively control ventilation, and to time plantings for continuous yields. On a winter evening in December of 1848, nearly 2 years after Eliza had first stood in the damp earth beneath her cabin with a speculative notion, she sat on the steps leading down into the greenhouse. Grace was seated beside her, clutching the rag doll that Mrs. Peterson had gifted her, a doll now well worn and cherished. The lanterns cast a gentle, warm light. The plants flourished in their orderly beds. Outside, through the open doorway at the top of the stairs, snow was falling steadily. But here, beneath the floorboards, it was warm, verdant, and vibrantly alive. "Mama," Grace said softly. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you miss Papa?" It was a question Grace sometimes posed, always with sincerity, always when something evoked memories of James. "Every day," Eliza replied truthfully. "But I believe he would be proud of this. He built a cabin to keep us safe. We built a garden to keep us fed. We are both doing what is necessary." Grace nodded, seemingly content with this explanation. She leaned against her mother, and they remained in comfortable quietude, enveloped by the tangible evidence of ingenuity, perseverance, and the fundamental human spirit's refusal to yield to adversity. The greenhouse beneath the floor had originated as a desperate idea during a challenging winter, it had evolved into something far more profound. It was a testament that even under the most arduous conditions, with limited resources, and when others declared it impossible, a determined mind could forge a path forward. Eliza May Dawson had not merely constructed a greenhouse, she had cultivated a future, one meticulously sown seed at a time. Outside, the winter raged.